So when did you come?
I feel like I'm in capable hands. Lekin, yeah, I also, it's like, I feel like it's so much easier
You
to
look different.
The night before.
not be the moderator, frankly.
Moderating how many panels?
Yeah, sure.
ये दूसरा है.
अच्छा, okay.
Well, the first one was supposed to be more of a conversation.
Too
Absolutely.
low for me.
No, that works great for me.
First one was supposed to be more of a conversation.
Okay.
I think that's actually the worst.
Right,
It's just like two people and
Yeah.
they're like, अच्छा बातें करें.
मेरी एक दोस्त है, सॉरी मैंने आपको मैसेज कन्वे करना था, वो उन्होंने देखा जब मैंने लगाया ये तो उसको कही मैं बड़ी जेलस हो रही हूँ क्योंकि उस अमेरिकन फीवर की वो बहुत बड़ी फ़ैन है। तो उसने कहा मेरी दोस्त है नीलोफर सिद्दीकी, वो न्यूयॉर्क में पढ़ाती है, शी इज़ अ पॉलिटिकल साइंटिस्ट। उसने कहा मैंने कहा मैं आपका मैसेज जो है कन्वे कर देता हूँ।
Okay, नाम क्या है?
नीलोफर सिद्दीकी।
Okay, like that sounds.
शी इज़
यहाँ लाहौर से.
नहीं, she is a foreign service kid, but she grew up in Islamabad, or she was in Islamabad at some point. Now she lives in, she teaches at the State University of New York in Albany. She was at Yale for her PhD.
कौन सा साल?
2015, 16 type of फारिग हुई होगी. But she must have been there since 20, yeah. So maybe that's why the name might sound familiar. So anyway, उसने कहा मैं बता दूँ। और फिर आपकी दूसरी किताब पे एक मेरी दोस्त ने मुझे कल मैसेज भेजा, उसने कहा मैंने कल रात शुरू किया और मुझे अफसोस है कि ये ख़त्म हो गया। सो मैंने कहा पब्लिक रिसेप्शन जो है वो ये
Nice,
इस वक्त।
nice, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया.
Can I go to sleep?
Hafiz.
Yes, the dignitary.
By any chance, Dure, can we get some pen and paper?
Oh yes, exactly. One second. Because I have.
Sometimes zero carbon obstructs knowledge transfer.
Yeah. He says zero carbon obstructs knowledge transfer. That's a great point. In all my classes, I've
The idea of knowledge was converted into paper.
yeah,
And we are trying to get.
I've gone back to having like a tech-free classroom for all of my classes
Nice.
at the university. All of my students now have to go through the arduous task of actually writing out most of their exams and taking notes in class. And
Me too.
yeah,
I
it's a
can
struggle.
ask them. I do have a pen and I have paper and I have.
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I have.
And I have crayons
This
that I
extra-
keep in
this
my
extra
bag.
pen
I
है,
also
extra pen,
have
extra pen
sticky
मिलता है।
notes, but it's like this.
ये अगर आप give that one.
That's okay. I mean,
Here. आप कुछ करेंगे?
हाँ नहीं, मैं अपने फ़ोन पे नोट्स बना रहा हूँ।
Needs to do a few more. It's okay.
G. Of the walk? Yeah, plenty. Okay.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Good afternoon. It is my honor to be moderating this panel on the next Asian Tiger, very loosely titled, in which we will hear from academics and writers working in 3 different South Asian countries who also have knowledge beyond those 3 South Asian countries of the general South Asian landscape, how it is shifting with a particular eye to the young people in these countries. So without further ado, I will read out short bios for all 3 of our wonderful panelists. Dr. Shahab Enam Khan is a leading expert on foreign affairs, defense, and security with regional expertise in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Indo-Pacific. His work spans countering extremism, migration policy, and regional cooperation, with advisory roles for UN agencies, USAID, and other global institutions. A frequent voice in international media, he also serves as academic advisor to Bangladesh's National Defense College. Welcome, Dr. Shahab. Samanata Thapa Magar is the Asia partner and head of programs at Startup Discovery Asia, SDA, where she drives inclusive innovation programs for climate startups and SMEs across South Asia. She has worked with organizations across diverse sectors, including climate, technology, agriculture, renewable energy, health, and education. Samanata is also the co-founder of Hoshala Creatives, Nepal's first sustainable fashion advocacy brand, and serves on the board of We United, empowering girls through sports. She is also a founding member of ISEC in Nepal and advises ward-level youth clubs in Lalitpur on innovation and entrepreneurship. And finally, Umair Javed is an associate professor at the Mushtaq Gurmani School of Humanities and Social Sciences, which he joined after completing his PhD at the London School of Economics and Political Science. His research studies the politics of urban development and the informal economy in Pakistan, as well as forms of non-state and informal welfare across a range of contemporary Muslim societies. So thank you everyone for joining. It's such an honor to be here with you guys. So as most of us are aware, South Asia has had collectively, to put it very mildly, it has had a few turbulent years, from Nepal, where young protesters dismantled the government, to Bangladesh, where another set of protests led to Sheikh Hasina resigning, to the 2021 coup in Myanmar, and this is just to name a few, obviously. There has been a lot of socio-political turbulence in the region. Each of these countries, each of these incidences deserves its own panel, but for the purpose of today's panel, we're hoping to gather together these three brilliant minds, thinking through various political and economic issues, and see what kind of similarities, but also important differences present themselves within these challenges facing these places. So since it's sort of the most recent thing on the news cycle, Samanata, I'm going to start off with you, and I'm hoping that you can provide the audience a summary and perhaps also an interpretation of what has happened recently in Nepal.
Sure, thank you. Before I begin with, am I audible? Before I begin with what happened recently, I think it's important to really know what Nepal is. So we're a very small country, but a beautiful one, with a population of nearly 30 million now. And we're bordered by...
Samanata, we might need you to... आप अगर इनका mic fix कर दें, please.
Or maybe I need to come forward a little. It's my bag. I'm just... Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. We're a small but a beautiful country with a population of nearly 30 million. We're a landlocked country, so on the south, the east and the west we have India, and in the northern where we share the Himalayas with, we have China, of course. And with that, as a landlocked country and a small country, Nepal has been through a lot of transitions, and this recent movement isn't the only one. In 1990s, we had the first People's Movement, which established parliamentary democracy. And 1996 to 2006, we had a Maoist insurgency, also known as the People's War, where a lot of rural communities were mobilized. And following to that, in 2006 is when we established Democratic Republic of Nepal, where we overthrew the monarch. And this is where the multi-party systems and the Maoists came to a 12-point agreement of running the country democratically. And since then, in 2015, we had a first constitution, and on the basis of that constitution itself, a lot of decisions are currently being made. But this really shows the history of mass movements that happened in the 1990, the 2006, and why is it happening now? Why did the recent Gen Z protest took place? Plays a very important role. So in the past 14 years, ever since we had the Constituent Assembly and the Constitution, we've only had 8 geriatric politicians running the country, between them, sharing the power between them 14 times. It's the same 8 people, men, above the age of 60s, who've been sharing the power, who've been making decisions. because a new Nepal was promised to us back in 2006 when the second mass movement took place. But we haven't really been able to see the result, and the power being, and young people and their voices being heard. So in the recent Gen Z, am I taking too much?
No, not at all, not at all. I think we are going to try switching out your mic
Okay.
because the problem might be with the mic.
Was I audible until now? Okay.
It's a small enough room that people could hear you, but I think people can hear you better now.
So how it all started recently would really be around, as you may know, there's a protest also happening in Indonesia, and with the social media, a lot of Generation Z, people between the age, people who were born between 1997 to 2012, they also have a lot of access to social media, where they were learning about what's happening in Indonesia, what happened in Bangladesh last year, what happened in Sri Lanka a few years ago. And there was a very famous trend that was exposing the political elites, where, you know, they had a very luxurious, wealthy lifestyle. And the young generation was exposing that through TikTok videos. There were some songs that were going viral with, you know, very luxurious lifestyle, wealthy lifestyles. And the question of accountability really started arising amongst the Generation Z. And while that was taking a momentum, that is when the government and when the ruling party politicians were also a subject and were being questioned. This is when the whole social media ban came to place. A directive came to place that certain social media companies such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Meta, and all of them, Twitter will not, X now, everything was banned within the span of 2 days. And there was a lot of rage, not because there was a social media ban, but you were criminalizing the voice, the freedom of speech. You were really stopping that. And that is what really brought a lot of students. I don't know who started it, but there was this trend going viral that we're going to meet on the 8th of September. And I was following, and I was using VPN. TikTok was still operating. So there were a lot of conversations around where are we going to meet, how are we going to keep it peaceful. So before the day started, it was actually very exciting, you know, in the morning, in a very Generation Z way of doing things where people were doing fit checks, like I'm going to my first protest. We could really see millennials giving that space, like, you know, every generation has its time to question the government. So everyone was going to the streets on a very positive note, and I had a few of my friends go there, join the protest as well, where they were like, it was all good until 19 people were shot dead, where they started using first the water cannons, the tear gas, the rubber bullets, and eventually live ammunitions, which was not required. There were students in their student dress so that, you know, really protecting themselves. There were things, and soon after that, what happened on the 8th, once the live ammunitions went viral, once the shootings became so viral through social media again, there were people reporting on the ground through social media. This is when there was a whole turn of events that took place on the 9th of September, where you must have seen that the Supreme Court, the Prime Minister's office was burnt down, and overnight, the then Prime Minister resigned. So right now, to cut it short, right now we have an interim government in place. We also got our first women Prime Minister who's leading the interim government. Of course, there are a lot of speculations around it, and we're waiting for re-elections in February. But it really says that who died, who were the martyrs, who were injured, also says a lot about who were in the protest. And these were young people who were trying to change the circumstances, most of them trying to go abroad, overseas for studies or to be working, and came not just from Kathmandu, from different parts of Nepal, especially belonging to the lower income families of Nepal. So that was when the question against corruption and impunity began. Our voices were being suppressed. The voices of the young were being suppressed, and that was the outpour, that was the cries on the street that we could see. Is what recently happened, to summarize it. I know I did take a while.
Taken much longer. And I would love to hear from Shahab and Umair if there are certain parallels that you see. I know there's already been talk about how, and you mentioned too that there's a feeling that these people were, obviously they were learning from other countries, they were seeing similar things happen elsewhere, and if there's a sort of shared kindle that is igniting this.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Maybe try,
Can you hear me?
maybe try holding it very close to you.
I'm a South Asian, so I talk a lot. Thank you very much. And I think what our colleague was talking about is very important. I mean, there are certain things that we need to be very mindful about. The first, how the society has changed. Many of our future politicians will be graduating from a new university called WhatsApp University. So you can understand that how things will be changing faster. And the politics that was heavily dependent on something called number, because more vote you get, you become the winner, right? That concept has been changed again. That has been heavily challenged. I mean, Nepal is a classic example, Bangladesh is a classic example, and now you have a left-leaning government in Sri Lanka is another example. Now, where do we see the similarities among these countries? The first and foremost issue is technology. Technology has gone to the hands of those who were always been ignored. So what it means, this technology has given power to those who never had the voice to be heard in any spectrum of life, whether within the household or beyond the household or beyond the society, right? That comes with a very simple understanding that how do they see the concept of state. The very concept of state has changed. I mean, the state that we were used to. I mean, I can give you an example of my grandmother who got married when it was unified British Empire. So her concept of state is completely different than her daughter-in-law's concept, who was born when it was unified Pakistan. And then my sister came, her understanding of concept of state is absolutely different than my mom, because she was born in an independent state of Bangladesh. And when it comes to my niece, who is born in a state which is borderless, because she doesn't really care what is happening within the border, because she is also talking to me about what Elon Musk's daughters are doing too, right? So what it means that her friends are now swimming in somewhere in San Jose, and she's talking about it that, look, you know, this is my friend who is swimming in San Jose, and this is how I see my future, that I want to be in San Jose swimming. So what it means that the whole fundamental concept of state has evolved into an entity that is beyond the very understanding of the political state that we are used to. The third problem, or perhaps the third change that all these three countries has offered, is that the age of blame game is over, right? We used to blame everyone for everything. I mean, if there is, you know, if there is a problem that electricity is not working, then somebody from planet Mars has come and destroyed it, so therefore blame it on the Martians. Those are over, because you now have a greater scrutiny, greater oversight, greater accountability, not only in the hands of them, but also in the hands of the ones that you haven't seen, which means that is the technology entrepreneurs. Now, your security is no longer, I mean, you're very happy with the whole idea that social media we have this superpower, we are changing everything, but you also have to know that the knob is in someone's hand. And that is another scary part that probably Gen Z is yet to wake up to. I mean, look at what's happening in ChatGPT. Today you have ChatGPT, tomorrow you have ChatGPT 6, day after tomorrow you have something. And my biggest struggle when it comes to my student, that when they submit a paper, term paper, it looks like that probably, I mean, Bill Clinton wrote this. I mean, I asked someone that what is the US foreign policy, and it looks like Bill Clinton himself written it, but I checked in the plagiarism software. Well, no, it's not there. I mean, the language is somewhere between Shakespeare and Robert Frost. And then when I ask them that, give me a viva, and then they come down to the reality, okay, I'm a pure Bengali. I mean, where did you get this language from? No, the whole idea of knowledge is changing too. So the fundamental change in the fifth level that we got to see, the whole concept of knowledge has changed. Means your social fabric has changed, your social contract has changed. Now we can ask the government, even if we want to be unseen, and ask the government, hey, hello, what's going on, right? I mean, and that's where the fear lies for the state. And state is not habituated to get a question coming from those who were always been unseen, unspoken. That power of the unspoken, the marginalized, somebody in Peshawar, somebody in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is now able to do that. I mean, they can ask the question. So the whole idea of question has become a major factor. Now, when it is a question, something called cognitive behavior comes in. Who is asking the question and how the question is being asked? Now, if you look at Google, I mean, everyone loves Google. I mean, look at your TikTok profile, look at your Instagram profile. I love Instagram profile. I mean, look at all the girls posting their pictures, boys posting their pictures. I mean, if you ask them, why are you posting these pictures? The answer becomes absolutely blank, right? So what it means that the whole idea of questioning is also related to your idea of cognitiveness. And the cognitiveness, when you don't have enough safeguard, your guard railings, which is intellectual, ideological, value-based, constantly becomes eroded. And that's where the fear lies, is that are we able to control? Because look at Arab Spring. Anything changed fundamentally? I doubt. I mean, look at what happened in Egypt. The military came back. Look at what happened in Bangladesh. Have we been able to really get all the potential out? I doubt. Sri Lanka still struggling. So what it means that the revolution, uprising, movement are absolutely great, but if you don't have your structural guard linings, you're not going to get the benefit, and that's where the problem is. That's where the education comes in. And our education is very much Gora education, right? I mean, we love to be a British, we love to be an American, right? I mean, we love to be somebody what we are not. And social media comes with that too. So disinformation, misinformation, and no information, and this collectiveness of all these things has created a further tension, not between the state and the individual, but between the individuals too. And that's where you are going to see that even back in 1990s, the television, price of television literally came down to a level where anybody can buy, but still 50% of the global population never had access to television. And you're exactly going to see the same thing, that when the technology comes in, it is not going to be homogeneous too. And this is where the problem lies, how the state is going to negotiate with the individuals in terms of information, in terms of the guardrails that talked about. That will define where we will go. I'm sorry. This is my dystopian, too much reading of George Orwell makes you kind of a very dystopian guy.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
Would you like this?
Yes, thank you. Hello. Yeah, That's much better. Thank you to both of the esteemed panelists and to Dure for putting this together. So I'm going to sort of focus on one aspect of what's been discussed so far. So in the two sort of the broader overview that Dr. Shahab gave and the story we heard from Nepal, there's one particular thing that I've been sort of struggling with in terms of sort of analysis, and that's the question of age. So we keep hearing that protests are young people are protesting, young people are angry. The Nepal protests were Gen Z. The Bangladesh protests were student-led. Very similar phenomenon in Sri Lanka. In Pakistan, we hear that some political movements and political parties are supported overwhelmingly by young people. It's young people's anger that led to the outcome of the 2024 election. But really, what is age representing, right? Age is, it's just a number, and it's sort of, it's demography at its core. But what makes it politically salient? And I think part of the answer goes back to the question of inequality. I think age is ultimately refracted through material experience, and part of the problem is that economies, even when they have been growing, as in the case of Bangladesh, or economies that have been struggling, as in the case of Pakistan, there is a widespread notion that this growth has not been equitable in nature, right? That this growth doesn't necessarily translate into concrete material outcomes for young people and for people who are sort of just entering into their professional lives, or people who are thinking about building families, or people who are sort of, moving up in the world in some form or the other. So there is this sort of underlying sort of problem with inequality, redistribution, or the lack of redistribution that I feel is probably at the heart of political disruption that we see across South Asia. But then there's this other aspect of it, which is linked to something that was said earlier, which is this idea of aspiration and the relationship between aspiration of what people want, what are the objectives, aims, ambitions in their lives, what the state or this particular type of state is created for and what it can actually provide, and the use of new technology and social media, which in some instances has deterritorialized aspiration, right? So it's no longer that you're no longer aspiring for a life. The San Jose example I think was very relevant here, that you're no longer aspiring for a good life in the confines of what it means to be Pakistan, but rather you are aspiring for a good life on a plane that is global in nature, or what we consider to be the global middle class, right? Consumption patterns, same sort of fashion, same sort of consumption, similar aspirations, all of those things. So I feel these things have collectively come together, that at one level you have economic sort of anxieties and inequality and stagnation, which is certainly perpetuating discomfort and frustration. And at the same time you have sort of an immense recalibration of what people actually want from their existence, right? And there I think technology becomes sort of instrumental. So I think in the case of Pakistan, it's actually pretty straightforward. I think Pakistan is a bit different from the other cases, because Pakistan has a much more, ironically, despite Pakistan's troubles with formal democracy, Pakistan has always had sort of some form of political participation through the political party system, through local, mobilization, community-based associations, and so on, which is why a lot of politics ends up getting channeled through party politics. So the so-called uprising, or the Gen Z uprising in Pakistan, happened through the institutional framework of party politics in some form, right? And obviously the elections that happened in 2024. So it gets channeled in that form, yet the frustration I feel is broadly shared across these. So I mean, if I were to think about this in purely sort of social scientific terms, it's the institutional structures are different everywhere, but the underlying frustrations are similar, and that they give rise to these episodes of anger, which then get reflected differently depending on the context that you're in. So, it could be street protests, it could be student-led protests, it could be, Discord servers that are sort of, enabling mobilization, or in the case of Pakistan, it could be a political party that, is seen as the right answer to the questions of inequality and questions of corruption and questions of elite capture and so on and so forth. So I think these are broadly shared from. Now, the problem, I mean, and there's a democratic impulse. So we say, all uprising, all democratic sort of expression is good. You know, these are people who are sort of expressing their deep-seated frustration with inequality, their deep-seated frustration with geriatric politicians, sort of almost a gerontocracy in some ways, that old people are continuously making decisions for young people. And I think that's all perfectly, that's perfectly reasonable. But also what is important to then sort of understand is that there is no grounded ideology that explains or that sort of in some ways helps them interpret inequality beyond consumption. So inequality, the answer to inequality that is posed is that we need sort of a better standard of living for everyone, yet there is no framework to get to that better standard of living other than, again, anger and sort of public sort of, and I think, not to sound sort of, anachronistic in any way, but this has pretty much been the outcome of 4 decades of neoliberalism in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, where questions of socioeconomic inequality have largely been sort of curtailed to these sporadic types of anger, which are then expressed largely through their need for a better life, a need for more material consumption, your ability to have the same lifestyle as those in San Jose, right? So I think that's the pitfall that this kind of anger also risks running. That at one point you can't deny the frustrations, you can't deny the systemic, structural issues that plague South Asian economies and obviously polities in various forms. But also, what does the answer look like and what is the answer based on? That is where I think we don't have a coherent alternative. And I'll just end this on one other issue, which I think is more global in nature, that everywhere we have seen frustration take various forms, whether it's youth uprisings or it's anger against a dynastic elite or anger against the military in some countries, or it's anger against immigrants, it's anger against minority communities. All of these are responses to some material dislocation that people are, material and cultural dislocation that they're feeling. But there's no uniform ideological response to this particular issue. There's no uniform way of understanding this issue, right? Rather, it gets sort of, interpreted through whatever is popular, whatever is common in those particular societies. I think that is where the divergences happen. But clearly, it is quite clear that the status quo, the way that the last 4 decades that we have chosen to organize our societies around the logic of markets, around the logic of consumption, that is untenable. This idea that if you do the right things, you will be able to get growth, that if you get a credential, you will be able to get a good job and a good life. I think that idea has been completely it's been proven to be hollow, especially when you take the example of many countries in the global south, that you have these over-credentialed, underemployed young people. And it seems like that whatever idea was sold to them was actually a pipe dream. And so I think that is a problem that we still don't have a coherent answer to. And yet we're seeing these in some ways that we're seeing these tremors and these sort of, fits that we're getting across the world of anger, of frustration, and the different forms that they're taking.
Thank you so much for that. I think, so one thing that I was thinking about, and I know, Umair, that you've written about this, sort of the changing dynamics of gender and how that intersects with technology, particularly in the Pakistani context. So not to, I know you just did a spiel, but to, if you're able to talk a little about that with the audience, but I'm also very curious to hear about how gender dynamics have shifted. I think it's a big part of what we talk about in Pakistan, particularly because there is a sense that even within the South Asian context, Pakistan does lag behind tremendously in terms of just female presence in public spaces, female presence in positions of power, just various metrics. And so just, curious to hear how gender dynamics have shifted, particularly as it pertains to, how technology has sort of pervaded everything.
Yeah, I think the transformation in gender relations in Pakistan is happening, and it's constantly been happening at a sort of a I wouldn't call it a subterranean level, but at something that doesn't make headlines that frequently, right? We also, I mean, obviously gender inequality, Pakistan fares very poorly, sort of, you know, second from last in the sort of gender equality index. And so a lot of those issues are very apparent. Yet at the same time, there are also these pretty significant structural changes. So pretty significant structural changes that are happening in the way gender sort of operates in the Pakistani context. So one is female attainment of higher education. And I think that's probably the big one that we see, and you can see visible examples of it around. You know, college students were here yesterday and today. It's roughly an equal split. So between the ages of 21 and 30, there are now as many men as a proportion of all men as women enrolled in higher education, right? The gap was roughly half just 10, 15 years ago. So in the space of 10, 15 years, we've had almost sort of complete gender parity when it comes to higher education. Similarly, in the last 5 years, women's access to cellular technology, so the gender gap in mobile phones was about 37% in 2022, but in the last 3 years, that gap has narrowed to about 17 or 18%. So more women having access to higher education, more women having access to cell phones, which means having access to information in various forms. Now, the problem that we're seeing is that in all of the statistics for gender autonomy, none of this is coming out, you know, in concrete form. So we don't see a large change in female labor force employment. We're not really seeing any changes in age of marriage, age of first conception, marital autonomy, a lot of these issues. But my sense is that maybe the data isn't capturing a lot of this reality, and that underneath, I think a lot of transformation is taking place. And to link it back to what we were discussing earlier, gender is going to be a major flashpoint in countries where gender inequality is extremely entrenched. And if you look at the nature of some of this new type of right-wing politics, the populist politics, it has a very clear gender-based angle to it, of masculinity, of honor. You know, in Pakistan, we've had the TLP phenomenon, which very clearly and categorically raises issues of masculine honor as central to their politics. And this isn't just coming out of nowhere. It is partly driven by the fact that the gender imbalance in this country is being sort of slowly eroded because of structural and technological reasons, right? There's been an economic crisis for 4 years. I would be very surprised if it didn't have an impact on female labor force employment. Usually women participation in labor force increase at the time of economic crisis because you need 2 incomes instead of 1, right? So these, you know, I feel like that is also partly where this politics of anger, that is one potentiality that exists within the politics of anger, which is how do you deal with the question of women taking up more space than they have ever been sort of allowed to have in a gender unequal context such as Pakistan.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. For Nepal, definitely the gender, when we think of it from a gendered lens, I always tell this, where it's very important to go back to history. It's very important to go back to our archives to read the news, and this is what I've been encouraging the Gen Z to do as well. Because you just can't denounce the things that have happened in the past just because it's not working out at the moment. For example, the freedom that I enjoy, or most of the things as a woman that I have the privilege of now, is because there were few women who fought for this in the past. There are a lot of women whose names never come up. Their names were never on the news. Their names are never in the history books. And you have to find out, dig deeper. And this is one of the stories of, in the People's War, when the Maoist insurgency happened, it was mostly the rural women who were speaking up. Not even women from, not the urban elites, not people from Kathmandu, the capital city, but women from villages. And when men were joining the People's War at that time, women were the sole caretakers of the households. They were looking after their farmlands. And this also showed, this was also a moment for them to feel empowered, although it was circumstances. Nepal, in the Nepal army, we did not recruit women until the People's War ended, because a lot of women were also in the front line of the People's War. So I always credit it to the women in the rural areas whose voices, of course, now. So this is also where the tension comes from, because they fought for a freedom, for a better world. And when that was not achieved, all the promises were not fulfilled. Their voices were not heard when we finally established a parliament. That is when the tension also starts. But again, even in the uprising, women's voices are always shunned down. But I think with that, there's a huge difference in what we see as well, really in policy level, whether it be through financial institutions where women, youth, and the marginalized have very little access to resources such as credit, land, technology. So there's a huge gap in that, of course, that is yet to be filled, where again, even on the basis of gender, when someone's trying to, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs globally as well, for women startups, only 1.6 venture capitalist funding actually is ever received by women globally, which means the situation is even more dire in Nepal, where access to funding to start something of their own, to do something of their own, there's still a lot of policy gaps within that. However, recently in Nepal, there was also a whole divide, and as my colleagues rightly mentioned, when we're using technology, it's also not just individuals against the system, but individuals against individuals. So right now, what we're also seeing is a lot of conversation around meritocracy, but with Nepal, on merit basis that there should be representation. But for a country like Nepal, where we've had systemic barriers, which does not allow everyone the same equal opportunity to flourish, to the right to education, merits alone is not enough to really make sure that the voices that are unheard, that needs to be heard in the parliament, in the decision making, in the law making processes. It's very important that it's not just merit basis, that the representation is not just merit basis, but also experienced, based on experience as well, because a lot of people might not have the degrees or the education, but have experienced a lot of things and lived experiences which can really shape what it should look like. So definitely it's difficult to strike that balance, but we've made some great progress from the 1990 constitution that we had with only 5% reservation for women in the parliament. We have 33.33. If we look back in 2017's local election, that was the first local election for Nepal after becoming a democratic republic. In the first elections in the 2017, reservations were one of the key reasons why there were very good representation of women in the local and the federal government and the state government as well. However, we could see that when these reservations were removed in the second elections that happened, which happens every 5 years, in 2002, we could see a significant drop of women. And when we talk about women again, there's a lot of intersectionality. Because the intersectional lens of it's not enough just being a woman, but there are women from marginalized communities, indigenous community, where the voices of women with disability, women from the Dalit communities. So I think we have a long way to go, but we've also seen it's an iterative process, I would say. It's an iterative process, and that is exactly what we're going through as well, where we have a good, I wouldn't say a great constitution, but we at least have something to work on, things that's gonna, probably get better as an iterative process on its own.
Thank you for that. I would like to shift gears a little bit because I'm also keeping an eye on the time. Dr. Shahab, right before we started this panel, I called the SARC a failed experiment, and you corrected me and told me that it was a dormant experiment. And the reason why I see it as failed is actually because for so many of us, it's really impossible to think of this region as a region. I have this distinct memory of being in Colombo and for the very first and last time seeing a separate ticket for SARC visitors, where like, of course, it was a discounted ticket, and for the first time feeling like I was the beneficiary of this idea. And so I would love to hear you talk about why you think it is dormant, and if there is, in its current iteration or in a different one, if there is any point in dreaming of that sort of regional cooperation, just being able to imagine us as an entity, as one, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's a very important question. Before going to that, I was listening to Umair and Samanata about women empowerment. I'll link it with my next position on the cooperation stuff. How I believe that unless you see cooperation from a gendered perspective, we are not going anywhere. So I'll connect it for you. I mean, both of them were absolutely right. I mean, look at the way that everything is morphing. I come from a country, my God, as ruled by 2 women for 34 years. For the first time we have got, in my memory, first time I got a male head of the government, which is Dr. Yunus, right? So did that 34 years of women's rule change Bangladesh? Yes. And that's the point I'm going to talk about and link it to the next point. You see what happened, I mean, these 34 years. At some point of time, we had the Prime Minister, Deputy Head of the Head of the Parliament, Opposition Leader of Parliament, Deputy Opposition Leader of Parliament, Home Minister, and Foreign Minister, all women at a time. That was a huge task for anyone who understands the whole phenomena. I mean, probably Indira Gandhi was able to really assert herself as in a complex society like India. Benazir Bhutto, again, in a very complex society like Pakistan. Chandrika Kumaratunga, when it was a very conflicted situation going on in Sri Lanka. So look at all these women, and then we have 2 of our ladies, I mean, our beloved ladies. I mean, one is living, one is on a sojourn somewhere else. So, but in any case, look at all of them. They have fundamentally shaped and reshaped the whole ecosystem of the country, in which we are getting the benefit by saying Bangladesh's female cricket team, despite everything, is getting the South Asia Cups, right? That's a phenomenal achievement, and it takes a long time. You need to change the structure of the society. What they have done at the same time, the gender gap in terms of pay, we are now one of the top in the world where you don't get to see that gender gap in terms of pay is phenomenally high. It is not. So therefore, look at them. The entire ecosystem of 180 million population's trade is dependent on women as the ready-made garments. And look at this Dr. Yunus. He never paid any money to a man. I mean, sorry, I mean, our far righties were extremely upset with him that why he doesn't give money to men. He was always given money to women by saying, this is the only indicator, this is the only entity that keeps the society stable. I mean, this is the first responder when it comes to climate change. It is the first responder when it is famine. It is the first responder when it is migration, whatnot. Women never leaves. The men, being a polygamous entity, would always leave. I mean, Umair and I would be the first one to leave. But anyways, so what it means? It means that the whole idea of nation state, we haven't ever focused on national security as such. We have always focused on economics and economics. That's why Bangladesh does not have any conflict baggages with anyone, except for we have 1.4 million refugees came from Myanmar. That too we accepted with the spirit that in 1971 we were refugees too. And it was because the female contribution to politics allowed you to see this huge bulk of people coming from the other side of the border being the victim of genocidal spree, and we accepted them. Now what it means, if you look at a little upper from the state to interstate, the problem lies that most of the state sees everything from a national security point of view. Pakistan has a lot of issues with India. India has, God knows, I mean, they can make a compendium of how to make life miserable for everyone. And all these things are there, very much there. So what it means, that unless we come out of the concept of power as the indicator of relationship, populism as the indicator of your domestic politics, and your state apparatuses as the indicator of exercising your political power, we will not be going into anywhere. ASEAN, look at all these ASEAN countries, 25% trade is intra-ASEAN trade, and think about Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, everyone combining is at least 20 times bigger than ASEAN market, right? We can't do it because the market is seen from a political point of view, not from a natural point of view. Where does it lead us? Because we are not looking into the whole idea of common wealth, not the Commonwealth of London. I'm talking about common wealth from a point of view of an identity that is basically South Asian. So why SAARC is dormant and not failure? Because everybody still believes that we still have some commonalities in some point of time. Lahore's lassi or Delhi's lassi, we have a terrible lassi in Bangladesh, but still we do. I mean, all this lassi brings us together. The whole idea of biryani, I mean, I don't like biryani out of Bangladesh, but still the biryani, biryani, look at that. I mean, the culinary brings you together. Language brings you together. Momina Mustahsan brings you together, brings me closer to Pakistani music. I mean, look at all this. I know, I can understand your face, but still, that's a nice visual. So what it means is, Atif Aslam goes to Mumbai and sings. Look at the cat. I mean, he's not giving any damn to what's going on in South Asia, but that's how we should be living too. I mean, so going back to the whole idea of depoliticization of your identity, I mean, that's where the problem is. We are not inherently democratic. Let's face it. I mean, wake up. I mean, Pakistan, it has a ceremonial democracy. Bangladesh has a functional, so-called functional, weak democracy. India has morphed into once a great democracy into, propaganda machines. If you look at the Indian media, oh my, I mean, high decibel terrorism, I mean, in the vocal form, right? And look at all this. We are eroding into the whole concept of non-secular states because we believe that we need to retain our power. Now that power concept is going to be challenged by this particular generation that I started to talk about. And that's exactly when the democratization of regional institutions will come. Security Council in the United Nations, is it a democratic institution? Come on, I mean, they couldn't come up in a consensus about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening somewhere. I mean, that's why the moment you get into the national security and the moment you challenge the concept of national security, which probably the WhatsApp University won't do that, but beyond WhatsApp University, you also have the people who are digitally literate. And that's where we need to bank on. And that's where we need to infuse information. This is where we need to give education, enlightenment, knowledge. So knowledge, education, information are different. I mean, we all are super informative people. We know that 70% is youth. Yeah, then what are you going to do with this 70%? I mean, look at the number of university graduates and number of jobs that you have. I mean, how are you going to bridge it. I mean, population is going to increase, Malthus is going to be very much there, and Malthus would always tell you, hey, hold on, you're going to get more people until the whole saturation point comes in. The global population in the north is declining, in Japan it is declining. So what are you going to do with this number? So, you know, you have to empower people to understand number, not to use the number for the random reasons. And this is why when your SARC concept comes in, I am still hopeful, because at the end of the day, somebody in Dhaka will always love to go to Afghanistan to have a Kabuli pulao, even if not. And I've been looking for Peshwari chappal from Dhaka, right? So what does it mean? Dhaka's muslin is very important, right? If you are fashion fiesta, you're going to look into muslin, and then we have a place called Tangail in Bangladesh, which is famous for a particular sweet called cham cham. And then we suddenly saw that somebody in India has patented by saying Tangail cham cham is inherently Indian. And I said, like, hey, bro, I mean, we have never uplifted that part of Tangail to somewhere in India. I mean, it very much is part of Bangladesh. Now, politicians will always do politics, right? I mean, ticking is their job. But the rest of the world has changed, as I told you. I mean, Umair has rightly mentioned, San Jose is an example. I mean, look at, I mean, how many Japanese restaurants you have in Lahore? Why are you going to Japanese restaurants? I mean, I'm here to have kebab, then why are you going to sushi? That tells you that the world is constantly changing on the basis of the new perception about reality. And this is why I'm very hopeful at some point of time, despite politicians are making everyone's life miserable, putting a barrier between you and me and her, is probably not going to be a sustainable phenomena. But at the end of the day, there's something called natural migration, and it happens. You can't stop it. I mean, even Washington is trying to do so, but look at, I mean, half of the cabinet in Washington has some sort of migrant communication, isn't it? I mean, this is paradoxical. So therefore, I think at some point of time, I have a great faith on regional institutions, and I believe the moment there will be a lot of aspiration that will come up, and Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, everybody is showing that kind of structural changes, and that will put a lot of effort, because our kids really want to listen to music not only for Bangladesh, but from somewhere. I mean, they love Sri Lankan music. Look at Jacqueline Fernandez, for an example. I mean, she's a Sri Lankan living in Mumbai and loved by everyone in Bangladesh. I mean, look at her. I mean, the whole concept of identity of culture is changing too. So I am very hopeful that it is dormant at the moment, not dead. Dead is a different issue. The moment, and Pakistan and India will at some point of time come and say that, hey, you know, we really need to reform SARC, and we should have a mechanism to hold bilateral talks. And I don't understand why you can't have bilateral talks. I mean, come on. I mean, you do all these poking each other, but you can't talk to each other in a regional format. Is probably something that was outdated, that was designed back in early 80s when Cold War was there. Now that Cold War has shifted to 9/11, 9/11 has shifted to something else. Tomorrow it will be shifting to something else. So therefore your political realities will change too. Today, yesterday, India's best friend was US. It is probably, I think, they're now rethinking. I mean, yesterday, Pakistan's best friend was the US. Now the Chinese have become a closer tie. For us, everyone is best friend. So we got the tariff deal done. And then, of course, getting the military hardware from China too. So I think that sort of ecosystem will eventually reflect in the regional politics for their own survival, political survival. I mean, political survival cannot be on the basis on daily polarization. 75 years, I mean, 4 generations are gone. I mean, the new generation, except for the WhatsApp University ones, I mean, the others will really, really contribute to the understanding that I cannot survive without having access to mineral resources in Afghanistan. A little bit of consumerism will come in. I mean, I cannot create H100 chip set unless I have access to resources, right? So therefore you need it. Everybody needs it. So the necessity, not only for identity, but for technology, for economics, for resource distribution, for common wealth, will continue to be there, and that will make regional institutions to come into play.
Thank you for that note of hope. I did have...
I was a dystopian. I mean, I turned into utopian.
Exactly, yes, yes, I appreciate
That's
that.
the good part about being academic. You can change.
I am aware that we're almost at time, and so I wanted to see if there was any question. There seems to be one all the way in the back. हम उन्हें mic पहुंचा सकते हैं?
I try to do it quick. Yes, hello. I am Michael from Argentina. I think I am the only one from Latin America over here. I was hearing about democracy, and yesterday we were talking about the lack of democracy we are having in Latin America, the weak democracies we are having in our countries. And my question is, what do you think we might do or we can do in terms of democracies in our regions, because we have similar context in many aspects? So that's my small or big question.
I think this is a very important question. I mean, we love Argentina for football. I mean, you know, I have a big poster of Messi in my house. So the point that I wanted to tell you, democracy cannot be homogeneous. I mean, this is not something that one has to define for you. It has to be something that the state has to define for itself. Now, Westminster system or non-Westminster system, there are multiple models. I mean, American democracy, British democracy, European democracy, Chinese democracy. I mean, if you look at all those democracy has their own individual parameters. So what is my understanding of Latin American politics? I mean, which has a very strong socialist indicators very much embedded within the society, whichever way it is. So what it means, and so is the rightist elements very much there. So I think the countries that has weak democracy has to accept the fact that it is the society that will have to determine how, because community ownership is very important. Why development fails in South Asia in most cases? The very simple reason is community doesn't own it. I mean, the state owns it, the private sector owns it, the donors help you out. When the moment donors leave it, I mean, you hand it over to X and Y and Z entity, and therefore, you know, it becomes whatever it becomes. So I think the whole idea of democracy, if you learn from Bangladesh, has a very, very different ecosystem for everyone. Like even religion. I mean, if you look at Islam in the Middle East, Islam in India, Islam in Bangladesh, Islam in Pakistan has their own cultural assimilation, you know. So therefore, I think the whole political belief ideology has to change according to the society, ownership of the community, and a community can own anything. I mean, they can become Che Guevara, and the next day they become Donald Trump. It doesn't matter. I mean, let them choose the way they want to choose.
A great conversation. I'm Ajaz. Out of 14 peaks of 8,000 meters, Pakistan has 5 peaks like K2, Gasher Brahman, to glaciers like Baltoro Glacier in Pakistan, 64 kilometers, second largest non-polar glacier of the world, is rapidly melting. In Nepal, you have glaciers around Mount Everest, and glaciers are being affected also there. How Nepal is protecting glaciers or fighting climate change?
Thank you for your question. It's the same mic. Oh, okay. Yes, definitely. Nepal has a lot of glacial lakes as well. And I think around South Asia, Bhutan and Nepal has the most, which is also very vulnerable to climate change. I would say that currently in Nepal, we are really trying to figure out. But with the political instability again, the conversations around climate change, climate financing really takes the back seat. Which is why a lot of climate activists at the moment are very afraid. But when it comes to exactly what are we doing for climate change, I think the focus should really be around climate adaptation. There's very little that we could do to really stop the climate change that is happening. Nepal has less than 0.1 global emission globally when we look at it, which is very insignificant. Hence, there's a need and there's a call, and that is actually what I do. I work with climate entrepreneurs who are really working towards how can we adapt and become climate resilient, how can we make the communities climate resilient when there's something like a glacial lake outburst and flood that we keep seeing it frequently in Nepal now, which really affects the agriculture and the communities that live by the rivers and the communities up high in the mountains. Hence, there's still a there's a need for a strategic approach, and we feel like we haven't been there yet. But adaptation, I think mitigation would be something, rather than mitigation, adaptation, how do we adapt to the changing world, how do we become resilient, is something that we're yet to focus on. And definitely the conversation's taken a back seat, but there are people who are trying to really make sure that we're talking more about climate change, because it really does affect the tourism, and a major part of our GDP comes from the tourism in the mountains in Nepal.
Thank you very much for all the work you're doing, and also thank you to all the panelists for a great conversation, and thank you to the audience. We will disband now.
Thank you.